Hello, I'm Norman Swan. Welcome to Tonic. Today, the mystery of fat cells.
On average, obese people are making twice as many fat cells per year as lean people.
And a controversial treatment for anorexia nervosa developed in Sweden, which does seem to have an effect.
Then there is a chain of events that emerges and eventually ends up in an anorexic state.
Fat in our bodies is stored in fat cells. Now, you'd think that with all the interest in obesity around the world, we'd know a lot about the fat cell. But in fact, we know relatively little. We don't even know how many we should have in our body and whether that number gets bigger or smaller as life goes by. We suck these fat cells out with liposuction. Do they come back? Do we have a steady state of fat cells? Well, research at the Karolinska Institute in Stockholm is beginning to answer some of these questions.
So we make use of a geopolitical phenomenon, which was the Cold War. So during the period of the Cold War, there was a lot of above-ground nuclear bomb testing. And during this period, there was a lot of detonations, which basically caused a significant increase in carbon-14 in the atmosphere.
Radioactive carbon.
Exactly. So we have the stable isotopes carbon-12 and 13, which are the most highly abundant. And then you have very, very low levels of the radioactive isotope carbon-14 that occur normally. But as a result of all of this bomb testing, we have what we call the bomb spike. And that is that for almost 4,000 years, carbon-14 levels in the atmosphere have been almost completely stable. And then bang, with all this bomb testing, the values shot straight up. And then in 1963, there was a test ban treaty signed, and pretty much banning most above-ground nuclear bomb testing. So ever since then, the C14 values in the atmosphere have been decreasing exponentially. So we can use this to determine the age of cells.
What they do is they carbon date fat cells. That's using radioactive carbon to see whether new cells are created and how long they might live.
So we found that absolutely, adult humans do make new fat cells. On average, obese people are making twice as many fat cells per year as lean people, but this is also balanced by a similar death rate. So actually the rate of production of fat cells did not differ between lean and obese, and we're making about 10% new fat cells every year. But what was really interesting about the study was we looked at a cohort, so we biopsied about 700 people, took fat from them, established the number of their fat cells and the size of their fat cells. And then a cohort of these people lost a significant amount of weight over 2 years. They lost about 35% of their body fat. We then biopsied them again and looked at the number of their fat cells, the size of their fat cells. And they had significantly reduced the size of their fat cells, but they had absolutely no change in the number. So if we combine this with our radiocarbon analysis showing that we are actually making about 10% new fat cells every year, the truly interesting question is, why is the body not listening to the change in energy balance and making less? It seems that this is a set process, and understanding what regulates that is really the key question now.
So what happens with obese people is that they've usually grown more fat cells in childhood, about 2.5 times more than in thin people. And this is a curse that stays with them for the rest of their lives. So even though they may lose weight, they've got all these fat cells waiting to fill up again. And each of these cells lives for 10 years.
On average, yeah. About 50% of the fat mass in our body is replaced every 8 to 9 years.
And what about the fat inside cells? How's that being turned over?
The fat mass is really the product of the number of fat cells you have and the size of the fat cells. And the size of the fat cells is the result of how much lipid, how much fat you have inside the fat cell. So the next question we wanted to look at was, do lean and obese people and in metabolic disease as well have a different way and ability to put fat into the fat cells and move fat out of the fat cells? And actually, unlike what we found when we're looking at the cell turnover, we found no difference between lean and obese. We found that there really is a difference in the metabolic processing of the fat between lean and obese people, such that obese people have an increased ability to move fat and store it into the fat tissue, and they have a decreased rate of removing the fat out of the fat cells and out of the fat tissue.
So they can get hit both ways. Not only do they have more fat cells, they can load fat in and then find it harder to get it out.
You can see why so many factors contribute to really the poor outcomes that we're seeing in people maintaining significant weight loss once already reaching an obese state. On average, the lipid is completely exchanged in a fat cell every sort of about 6 times during the lifespan of a fat cell. But if we separate this average into lean and obese, it's sort of an average lifespan of the fat inside a fat cell lives for about 1 to 1.2 years in a lean person versus closer to 2 years in an obese person.
Any clues as to why?
No, this is now the key question. I mean, so how does a fat cell, if we're showing that 10% are born every year, 10% dying, what causes a fat cell to die? What stimulates a fat cell to be born? What regulates this process? These are all very key questions that we don't have answers for yet.
And in your study, was there any relationship between the amount of physical activity and fat turnover?
It's a really interesting question because certainly when it comes to the issue of the fact that lean people have a different ability to remove fat from the fat mass, it would be very interesting to look at that in the context of level of activity. In this study, we don't have any information about the level of activity of our lean versus obese people, so it's very hard to factor that in. In follow-up studies, we're hoping to do this same analysis looking at lipid turnover in high-end athletes. So really, one should be focusing on never becoming to the obese state in the first place, because once you get there, it's very difficult to reverse.
And that's why childhood is so important.
Absolutely. If you look at the statistics on children that are obese in childhood and the success rate of not being obese in adulthood, it's almost zero. It's a very strong indicator of lifelong obesity.
And here with some information of dubious value is our resident stand-up skeptic, Rich Brophy.
The perfect body. Some say it's unattainable. Others say it's possessed by a rare few. I say diets and gyms are bad for the soul. That's why I buy small t-shirts and just pretend I'm massive. A common feature of the Adonis in training is a protein powder pack the size of a small child. They mix it with milk or water, drink it, and wait for a six-pack to appear in their forehead. The theory behind necking this protein powder is that because of the way they train, these muscle men and women need higher than average quantities of protein to support their massive muscle growth. The protein generates the forces required to contract the muscles, and drinking these protein drinks not only assists that, but also is a great way to show people outside the gym that you've been doing some crazy workouts. Age, gender and body size all influence your protein needs, as do type and duration of exercise. Experts recommend 1 to 2 grams per pound depending on your regime. Knock back any more than that, you could fall victim to weight gain, kidney problems, osteoporosis or diarrhea, none of which are going to make you look physically flawless. So if you do prescribe to the protein powder philosophy, try taking it with a pinch of salt. And if it doesn't work, don't worry, because you can find these bad boys in the kids section.
Almost 9% of female adolescents are affected by an eating disorder. There aren't many effective treatments available, but a controversial program from the Karolinska Institute in Sweden seems to be getting good results. These experts say that eating disorders aren't in fact caused by mental health problems, but are caused by something that most women are doing at any given time.
I just felt like I really wanted to take control of my own health. So I started exercising and eating healthily and cooking my own meals, and I don't really know at what point, but it turned and I lost complete control of it and it became my whole world.
The main reason is the onset of dieting, and we say that girls as they are taught by someone to start dieting for various reasons. And then there is a chain of events that emerges and eventually ends up in an anorexic state.
So I would wake up and delay for as long as possible eating, but at some point my mum would notice that I hadn't had breakfast, and it would happen, and it would be a quarter of a cup of a very specific cereal with the milk on and then strained off, and then half a diet yogurt. I was so obsessed with every mouthful, and I would draw it out for an hour.
Anyone can get into this problem. The evidence that this is true is overwhelming.
The eating disorder made me feel really powerful to start with. People were telling me that I looked great and I felt like a success, and that was really addictive. That feeling was really addictive.
As a first sign of starvation, you get release of dopamine in the brain. This causes the patient to feel good, and it's a very common clinical experience with any anorexic girl that she will say, it felt great, I felt stronger, and this is the typical signs of dopamine release in the brain. And that is also the reason why physical activity increases. And then you become cold, your heart slows down, and you get captured in this anorexic state, which is very difficult to get out of. These girls are compelled to do the things they do when they come to the clinic.
I think my lowest point was I was hospitalised for low potassium, which is really dangerous for your heart and is quite a common side effect of bulimia and laxative abuse. And I was in hospital for 3 days, and they told me that if I didn't sort my life out, that I'd be dead within 6 months. And shortly after I got home, my parents sat me down and said, this is it, and we're going to give you an opportunity to go to a clinic in Sweden which is having huge success, or you are on your own and there's nothing more we can do for you. We've tried everything and you need to do this for yourself, and we're going to give this to you as your last chance. It was terrifying. It was unlike any other treatment I'd ever undergone. The environment in the clinic is really sterile, and I felt really alone when I first got there.
We teach the patients how to eat and how to perceive satiety by using a biofeedback device. Anorexics are gradually trained to increase their eating rate, to eat more and to become less satiated. And for bulimia nervosa patients, we teach them to slow down their eating and become more satiated.
The goal meal, which is about 300 grams in 10 to 15 minutes. This takes on average maybe 4 or 6 months. So then she has restored a normal eating behavior, but that's not, of course, the end of it. But then she might not need to use the manometer anymore, but she needs to practice how to eat together with others and eat in restaurants, social eating, so to speak. But essentially, you could say this is physiotherapy for your eating apparatus. So you need it's like a crutch for someone who broke her or his leg. You need it for a while, but then you want to get rid of it. No one wants to use the manometer for the rest of their life.
You can see that it goes down as you eat.
After each meal, patients rest in a warm room, as increase in temperature has an anxiety-reducing effect. And patients simply fall asleep in this warm room that could be up to 35-40 degrees Celsius. It also prevents them from compensatory behavior after a meal. Physical activity is otherwise common. To vomit after a meal is common. By putting them into this warm room, we can disrupt those activities.
Treatments for anorexia and bulimia suffer from a lack of scientific evidence. In other words, there are lots of treatments out there that have either not been studied properly or have been shown not to work. And unfortunately, not much does work. It is known, for example, that family therapy, which focuses on the family's responses to the person with anorexia, does work, but there's not much else, which means that there are few treatment options for dangerous conditions that are notoriously difficult to treat, have high rates of relapse, death from the condition, and even suicide. However, the Karolinska treatment has randomised control trial evidence to support it.
For the randomized trial we performed, it has three main results. The first is the randomized control comparison between our treatment and a group that did receive no treatment. This part of the study shows a strong effect of the treatment. The second part is an estimate of remission rates in a large group of patients, and that was 168 patients, and 75% of the patients went into remission in on average 14 months. The third part of the study is relapse rate in a group of 83 patients that were in remission, and only 7.8% relapsed within 5 years.
Since we started 1993, we have no deaths at any of our clinics in Sweden, in United States or in Australia, and we are very proud of that.
And it's not just anorexia that this treatment seems to work for. They've also moved into treating obesity.
Well, I was pretty bad when it came to eating. I just want to eat all the time. I practically ate off our house. They're like, we have not enough food for us to just eat everything. And then it is the fullness, what kind of meal it is, if it's lunch or if it's dinner.
So it is about portion size, and it is about becoming more satiated quicker during the meal. And then we have a pedometer, so we measure the number of steps during the day, and we encourage the patients to increase their activity day by day.
I think the only way that I was ever going to get better was if I made the decision on my own and to do it for myself, and I never would have been able to recover without the Swedish program. They gave me the skills which I put into place when I was ready. I worked my butt off, and every day was hard, but I was vigilant and I got my life back.
Pharmacogenomics is the technical term for the way that individuals respond to medicines depending on the genes that we've inherited. Now, this has the potential to save a lot of money because you can match the right person with the right medication. But for people with cancer, it's much more than just cost. You need to get the treatment that will work and to kill the cancer before the cancer can kill you. So pharmacogenomics is giving us a way to work out before treatment which cancer medications are likely to be most effective for which patients.
My interest in pharmacogenomics is in identifying who benefits from what therapies in such a way that we can tailor these therapies more closely to individual patients. But you have a disparity between technology that's very far evolved on one hand and real-life clinical practice on the other hand, where patients don't yet have access to these new technologies. So what we're trying to do is build a bridge between the two. This is not about the cost for the drug, and it's not necessarily about the cost for the assay or the test itself. This is really about the costs that are associated downstream, the medical cost with the complication of the medication that you have just been prescribing.
The challenge is to be able to more accurately identify people who will experience complications from their medicines, or those in whom the medicine won't be effective.
This is very important because I believe that once a drug already has been approved, we don't necessarily measure well enough what's actually happening in that post-marketing environment. Because if you think about it, that's really the largest trial in itself. So if we were to find better ways with registries, for example, to follow patients over time, monitor their outcomes, you may indeed find markers that are creating subpopulations for which we can better tailor the drug in the future. So it's almost a little bit like a learning healthcare system where we don't just say, okay, something is approved, now go, do it, but we continue on that learning curve.
Not only are we failing to learn from real-world outcomes by monitoring how medicines perform in real patients, It appears we're not using the opportunity to identify potential problems before prescribing life-saving medicines.
When we set out to do that trial of about 1,000 doctors who we called up, only 2 or 3 have heard of a genetic test for warfarin. And mind you, this has been after the FDA has updated the label for warfarin with genetic information, and it has been written up in the Wall Street Journal, in the New York Times.
So how do we change doctors' awareness so they consider whether genetic testing will provide information about individual patients to better target the medicines they prescribe?
That's a very good question. What we do is the infrastructure that we have access to allows us to, in real time, identify patients coming to the pharmacy who could benefit from, let's say, a genetic test for warfarin. So we can call the physician at the point when the patient comes to the pharmacy and inform the physician about the availability of such a test and ask whether or not the physician thinks that it might be useful.
In the future, will we be mapping the genes of babies so that the information is readily available?
Yes, I believe so, very much. I think that, as I mentioned in the beginning, the advancement in technology are so rapid that we're getting very quickly to the point where testing, or actually whole genome sequencing for babies or every one of us, makes a lot more sense than paying for individual specific tests that would actually cost a lot more. So what's important about this is that we're building the infrastructure to capture that information, store it, and be able to retrieve it at the point where it becomes useful.
Hey there gang, welcome once again to Minus the Meat, where we both make a similar meal, sometimes exactly the same meal, but what do?
We minus the meat.
You minus the meat, I keep the meat. Today we're making lamb korma.
I'm substituting the lamb for an array of healthy vegetables.
Oh, how can you substitute lamb?
Well, we're using the same korma paste.
Yep.
We are both using stock. I'm using a vegetable stock and Jimmy's using beef stock. We are both using coconut milk. However, I'm only using half the amount of coconut milk because...
I'm using a full 10.
You are using a full 10. But what a lot of people don't know is that coconut milk is actually quite high in saturated fats because it has a lot of palm oil in it. So I'm actually going to cut that in half and replace it with extra stock so that we're also cutting the calories in that sense as well.
I'm going to put the whole thing in.
Of course you are.
A lot of people mistake me for a coconut, so bring it on. So to make this amazing lamb korma magic, I will need to first brown the meat in my special cauldron over here. Ignite the flames. So it's important to let the oil heat up before you put the meat on top, otherwise the meat's just going to boil and stew.
Just remember that when buying vegetable oil, buy polyunsaturated, which will help to reduce your cholesterol levels. So we'll just saute these until they're translucent. We don't want them to brown or burn. Now we're going to add in our ginger, our chilli and our garlic and cook that for a further minute or 2.
Yeah.
I'll grab our korma paste.
Oh, thank you.
Right.
And I'll just stand here and stare and look beautiful. Hi.
Add in our
paste. Cook
that off for a minute or 2 just to release the flavours of the spices.
Woo.
Smells amazing.
Whoa. Well, that's all right then. Okay.
So, next we'll add in our stocks. So there's...
Thanking you.
Your beef stock.
Beef versus chicken? No, vegetable.
No, vegetable.
Almost got you. All right. And this is going to let it all simmer really nicely. Yes.
Add our coconut milk. So I just pour in half of mine, and it still is really creamy and will be really delicious once it's cooked. Okay, so these have been cooking for about half an hour. I'm just going to add my spinach and my green beans before we take it off, just to add that extra bit of health.
Sure. So I'm going to bring mine off the heat now.
Okay.
Ready to rock. So we've got our 2 slightly different curries, and we've got our 2 bowls of rice that are slightly different as well. Now you've got your
brown rice. I'm using brown rice today. It's higher in fibre, lower GI, and it's got more vitamins in it than your white rice.
I'm using white rice, which is higher in fun and makes you look more attractive. All right, so
we'll serve?
Let's do it.
Okay.
Then we add our garnish. We've got some coriander.
And some yogurt. So
delicious.
Put some yogurt on yours.
Yeah. Keep it coming.
What?
Yeah. Awesome. It's all about portion size here.
I'm just going to add a little bit of yogurt.
I'm going to share this with a small group of people. Bit of coriander.
Yum. I love coriander. Okay, so taste testing time.
You'll turn silver,
Thank you very much.
Right. I reckon we'll try mine first.
Okay, sounds good.
Mine. Now mine's not as pretty as yours, but
No,
it's like
not as
me.
colourful.
I'm rough around the edges, but it's what's inside that counts. So let's have a go.
Okay.
Okay, that's pretty yummy.
That's
Now
pretty good.
let's move along to the healthy minus the meat version.
I think I'm going to get a cauliflower.
What are these strange foreign objects? I think they're vegetables.
Oh, it's yummy too.
Nikki, you've done amazing. And like you said, I bought a whole tin
Of cream.
of coconut cream in there, and that is very fat. That is, let's not beat around the coconut tree. That is fattening stuff. But yours doesn't taste very much different at all.
At all, and it's got a really good selection of veggies. You've got spinach, you've got beans. The beans are nice and crunchy. The potatoes soft. I think they're equal.
Yeah, and the fact that they are equal, I mean, that's a healthy alternative.
It is.
You want to lose weight, and it's no stress at all.
Why not?
Put it there, sister. Well done.
Well done.
Awesome.
That's it for Tonic for this week. I'm Norman Swan. Glad you could join us. Don't forget, for more information, go to our website, and it has links to even more detail should you want it. I'll see you next time.